In May 1944, a man stepped off a military transport plane in Gibraltar, wearing the uniform and insignia of General Bernard Montgomery, one of Britain's most celebrated battlefield commanders. He walked with the same brisk gait, carried the same air of controlled authority, and acknowledged the assembled officers with the same brief nod Montgomery was known for across the entire Allied command structure. But this man was not Montgomery. He was Lieutenant Clifton James, a former music hall actor pulled from administrative obscurity in the British Army Pay Corps and transformed into a living weapon of deception. His mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. He had to convince German intelligence that Montgomery was personally overseeing preparations for an Allied invasion of southern France, drawing attention away from the real target, the beaches of Normandy. One mistake, one slip in the performance, and the entire operation could unravel. The stakes were not measured in careers or embarrassment. They were measured in the lives of tens of thousands of Allied soldiers who would storm the French coast in the largest amphibious invasion in human history. The idea sounds absurd now, almost theatrical. In the middle of the most mechanized and technologically advanced war the world had ever seen, British intelligence decided to bet part of their strategic deception on an actor pretending to be a general. But this was not improvisation or desperation. It was part of a calculated, multi-layered campaign of lies designed to paralyze German decision-making at the most critical moment of the war. But the challenge was finding the right man. Montgomery was everywhere in British public consciousness. His face appeared in newsreels, newspapers, propaganda posters. He had a distinctive lean frame, sharp features, a specific way of holding his shoulders. British intelligence needed someone who did not just resemble Montgomery in a photograph. They needed someone who could embody him in motion under scrutiny, in rooms full of people who had met the real general. The search led them to Clifton James, an undistinguished officer shuffling papers in Leicester. James had worked in theater before the war, playing small roles, never quite reaching success. He had joined the army and ended up in administration, far from the front lines. But someone noticed something. In the right light, from the right angle, James looked startlingly similar to Montgomery. His build was close, his facial structure near identical. It was enough to start a conversation that would change his life. James was brought to London and introduced to officers from MI5 and military intelligence. They did not ease him into the concept. They told him directly he would become Montgomery, not imitate him for a performance, but replace him in specific contexts where German eyes might be watching. The mission had a code name, Operation Copperhead, and it sat inside a much larger deception framework called Operation Bodyguard. The Allies knew the Germans expected an invasion. The question was where and when. If they could manipulate German assumptions, force them to spread their defenses thin, hold reserves in the wrong places, or the landing forces at Normandy might have a chance. Copperhead was one piece of that puzzle. If Montgomery, the commander who had beaten Rommel in North Africa, was seen in Gibraltar and North Africa just days before the invasion, German analysts might conclude the main assault would hit the Mediterranean coast, not the English Channel. It was psychological warfare at the highest level, and it all depended on whether a middle-aged actor could hold his nerve. The transformation process was intense and strange. James was given access to film footage of Montgomery, hours of newsreels showing how the general moved, spoke, gestured. He studied the clipped accent, the precise diction, the way Montgomery's hands stayed mostly still when he talked. He memorized facts about Montgomery's career, his known opinions, his public persona. Military advisors drilled him on protocol, on how a general of Montgomery's rank would interact with subordinates and equals. They taught him the subtle signals of military hierarchy, the unspoken communication that happens between senior officers. But there was a problem, one that became immediately obvious to his handlers. Clifton James drank. Not casually. He drank heavily, a habit built over years of disappointment and obscurity. Montgomery, by contrast, was famously teetotal. He did not touch alcohol, did not smoke, maintained strict personal discipline. The contrast was not just behavioral, it was physical. James had the look of a man who lived a dissolute life. Montgomery radiated control. Intelligence officers worked on James relentlessly. They demanded he stop drinking entirely during the preparation phase. They drilled him on posture, on the specific rhythm of Montgomery's speech. They brought in people who knew the general personally to test James, to see if he could fool someone with direct experience. Some of these tests went well. Others did not. James struggled. He was being asked to suppress his own identity, his habits, his instincts, and adopt someone else's entirely. The psychological pressure was immense, and it was only preparation. The real mission had not even started. In late May, just days before the Normandy landings were set to begin, James was flown to Gibraltar. He traveled in full Montgomery regalia, complete with the general's trademark beret and insignia. The cover story was that Montgomery was conducting last-minute inspections and consultations in the Mediterranean theater. It was plausible enough. Its senior commanders moved constantly, and Montgomery's presence in Gibraltar would not seem outlandish. But plausibility only mattered if the performance held. James arrived and was immediately thrust into visibility. He was driven through the streets in an open car, a deliberate display designed to maximize the chance that German informants would spot him and report back. He attended meetings with senior officers, some of whom knew Montgomery personally. He had to sit through briefings, nod at the right moments, offer occasional remarks that sounded like something Montgomery would say. Every interaction was a test. His handlers stayed close, but could not intervene without breaking the illusion. If someone asked a question James could not answer, if his accent slipped, if he reached for a drink by reflex, the mission would fail. The tension was constant. James later described the experience as surreal and exhausting, like being trapped inside someone else's skin while the world watched. From Gibraltar, James flew to Algiers. This leg of the mission was even riskier. Algiers was a hub of intelligence activity. German agents operated there, feeding information back to Berlin through networks of informants and collaborators. British intelligence wanted those networks to see Montgomery. They orchestrated public appearances, carefully staged encounters designed to be noticed and reported. James attended a reception with local officials. He was photographed. He was seen dining with Allied officers at visible locations. Every event was controlled, every conversation monitored, but the risk of exposure grew with each interaction, and James was struggling. The strain of constant performance, the fear of discovery, the isolation of living as someone else, it was wearing him down. He wanted a drink desperately. His handlers knew it. They watched him constantly, not just to protect the mission, but to protect him from himself. There were moments when it almost broke. James would later admit that he came close to abandoning the operation, to walking away or breaking character, just to relieve the pressure. The temptation to return to being himself, even if it meant failure, grew stronger each day. But he held on. Whether from discipline, fear of consequences, or some deep sense of duty to the soldiers who would soon hit the beaches, he kept playing the role. His handlers provided constant reassurance and supervision, walking a delicate line between support and control. Or the question that haunted the mission then and still lingers now is whether it actually worked. Did the Germans fall for it? Intelligence intercepts from the period show that German analysts did note Montgomery's presence in the Mediterranean. Reports filtered back to Berlin indicating that the British general had been seen in Gibraltar and North Africa. Some German units were kept on alert in southern France, resources that might otherwise have been shifted north to reinforce the Atlantic Wall. Captured German documents from after the war show discussions about Allied intentions in the Mediterranean, Debates about whether the main invasion would come through southern France or Italy rather than across the Channel. But how much of that was due to Copperhead? And how much was due to the dozens of other deception operations running simultaneously is impossible to say with certainty. The Allies were running fake radio traffic, simulating entire phantom armies. They were planting false documents on corpses washed ashore in neutral countries. They were using double agents to feed misleading information through channels they knew the Germans monitored. Copperhead was one thread in a vast web of lies. Historians debate its impact. Some argue it was a minor distraction at best, that the Germans were already overwhelmed with conflicting intelligence, and Copperhead added little. Others suggest that every piece of deception mattered, that the cumulative weight of all these operations created just enough confusion to delay German responses when the real invasion began. Or the truth is probably somewhere in between. Copperhead did not win the war, but it may have contributed to the conditions that made Normandy survivable. After the mission, Clifton James returned to England and disappeared back into the bureaucracy of the British Army. The operation was classified, its details hidden for years under official secrecy laws. James was forbidden from discussing what he had done, bound by the Official Secrets Act and military discipline. He went back to being a pay officer, processing paperwork, filing reports, far removed from the grand strategies he had briefly touched. The psychological aftermath was difficult. He had spent weeks living as someone else, suppressing his identity, performing under unbearable pressure. The transition back to normal life was jarring and disorienting. He felt forgotten, all discarded after being used for a singular purpose. The recognition he craved as an actor had finally come, but in a form he could never publicly claim. He had played the role of his life, convincing audiences that mattered more than any theater crowd, but he could not take a bow or hear applause. It was only years later, after the war ended and some operational details were declassified, that he was able to tell his story. He wrote a memoir published in the 1950s, detailing his experience as the Montgomery double. The book brought him some recognition, a taste of the fame he had chased as an actor before the war, but it also revealed the strangeness of his position in history. He had played a role in one of the most important operations of the war, yet he remained obscure. Montgomery was a household name, celebrated and honored. Or James was a footnote, a curiosity. The mission left a legacy in the world of intelligence and deception that extends far beyond World War II. It demonstrated that even in an age of technology and mechanized warfare, human deception still had power. The Copperhead playbook, using physical doubles to mislead enemy intelligence, has been repeated in various forms since. Authoritarian regimes have used body doubles to protect leaders or create confusion about their whereabouts. Saddam Hussein reportedly employed multiple doubles throughout his rule. Intelligence agencies have employed actors and impersonators in psychological operations designed to manipulate perceptions and sow confusion. The core idea that human perception can be manipulated through careful performance, and that seeing is not always believing, or remains relevant in modern intelligence work. But Copperhead also highlighted the risks inherent in such operations. The mission came close to failure multiple times. If James had been exposed, if a German agent had gotten close enough to notice the discrepancies, or if someone who knew Montgomery well had conducted an unplanned interaction, the mission would have backfired spectacularly. Instead of deceiving the enemy, it would have revealed the Allies' desperation, their willingness to resort to theatrical tricks that might seem amateurish. The line between successful deception and catastrophic exposure is often thinner than planners want to admit. There is something deeply strange about the fact that D-Day, the culmination of years of planning and the mobilization of millions of soldiers, depended in part on whether a struggling actor could convincingly pretend to be someone else. It speaks to the improvised, chaotic nature of war, where grand strategies and human frailty collide in unexpected ways. James was not a trained spy or intelligence operative. He was not a commando or a career intelligence officer with years of field experience. He was a man who could hold a resemblance under the right conditions, and who was willing, or perhaps coerced by duty and circumstance, to take on an impossible role. His success, however partial or debated by historians, came from his ability to manage fear, to suppress his own instincts and weaknesses, to perform under conditions where failure meant more than professional embarrassment or a bad review. It meant potential disaster for the largest military operation in history. The story of Operation Copperhead raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of deception in warfare that remain relevant today. How much of modern conflict is built on lies, on manipulating perception rather than confronting reality directly? How many other operations, still classified and hidden in archives, use similar methods? And in an era where deep fakes and digital manipulation can create convincing forgeries of anyone, where artificial intelligence can replicate voices, faces, and mannerisms with near-perfect accuracy, what does the Copperhead mission tell us about the future of deception? If a single actor with physical resemblance and weeks of training could fool intelligence networks in 1944, what can be achieved now with technology that requires no human double at all? The mission was a product of its time, already relying on the limitations of 1940s surveillance and communication. But its implications stretch far beyond World War II. It was a reminder that war is not just fought with guns and tanks, with superior firepower or better logistics. It is fought with information, perception, and the willingness to blur the line between truth and fiction. And sometimes, the people caught in that blur are not soldiers or spies operating with full awareness and training, but ordinary individuals thrust into extraordinary circumstances, asked to become someone else for reasons they may never fully understand. Clifton James lived that reality. He became Montgomery, convinced enough people to make it matter in the larger tapestry of deception, and then returned to being no one in particular. The mission succeeded to whatever degree it succeeded. On Normandy happened. The war turned in favor of the Allies. But for James, the experience left scars that recognition and memoirs could never fully heal. He had been used as a tool, a prop in a larger game played by intelligence officers and generals. And when the game was over, he was put back on the shelf. His contribution was real, but ultimately invisible, acknowledged only years later, when the world had moved on and the moment had passed.